Hey, it's Les from Comfortable Shoes Studio, and this is another episode of art making. In this one, I'm doing some urban sketching from the inside of my car since we had a cold, miserable day. So it's super windy outside and pretty cold and threatening to rain, which has been pretty standard here in Massachusetts these last couple of weeks. So I am using a Royal Talons Pocket Art Creations sketchbook. So it's about 4 3/4 by 4 3/4 wide. It is square, which is not a typical size for me. Um, I usually work in a rectangular size and a little larger. So really wanted to try something smaller. You can see the camera shake every time the wind would blow and there were these huge gusts. The camera would shake inside the car. It's bananas. All right. So I am using a magenta ink for my first layer of drawing. My intent here was to draw with the magenta ink and then go over it with black, and then finally with a water brush to lift and move the magenta ink. I did not end up using the water brush. I did end up using the black Fude pen. So this is just a medium nib, or is it a fine nib? It's a medium or a fine TWSBI nib. I've spoken on here before about how I typically enjoy TWSBI pens, but in the case of this one, it has always had a really anemic flow. It just doesn't flow very well, and has consistently just been scratchy. And I'm someone who will smooth their nib. Um, so I started out with this and just kept sketching in the parking lot, and then I do switch over to my Sailor 55-degree Fude nib and work the black over that and eventually just work with the black ink. So the total elapsed time of this sketch session was about 30 minutes. And I am focusing on drawing cars. And that brings me to my topic for today. And that's sort of giving myself the time to do something like this, but also making myself focus on something that I'm not really good at. So I noticed in my urban sketching that my vehicles were just wonky looking. They weren't even wonky in a fun way. They just felt wrong and they were a struggle to draw. So I decided to do what I did with faces and just buckle down and draw a lot of them. So, I started drawing portraits in 2009, 2010. I'd have to look it up, but it was a long time ago. And I started doing it because I was struggling with faces. My proportions were always off, and I was never getting the vibe of the person. It was always sort of like just not right looking. Everything was wrong. And that's how I felt about my vehicles as I was drawing them. I don't particularly enjoy drawing vehicles. I'm not a big car person. I don't care what kind of car or vehicle you drive. I find construction equipment actually pretty interesting, but when it comes to like cars, trucks, and SUVs, I just don't care. um, so they're like a thing that I'm not concerned with. That is part of everyday life here in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. Is part of almost every landscape, especially in an urban landscape. There are always vehicles in that landscape. And so I realized that it was a necessary thing for me to start to tackle in my drawing skill. So I started focusing on drawing these cars, trucks, and vehicles because of what I felt was inadequacy in my ability to capture them. And I know from experience that if I practice and I put in some time and effort on capturing these vehicles, that I will eventually get better at it. And it's just a matter of time and effort. And that is unfortunately an answer for many people. When someone tells me, "Hey, I like how you draw portraits. How do you do this? How do you get better? What are your secrets at getting better?" And the reality is the secret at getting better is actually time. You got to put miles on your pen and pencil. You got to wear down some pencils to stubs. You got to blow through some ink. and that's a necessary thing if you want to get better. There's no magic bean to make your art better other than time and effort and doing something focused. And it's hard to do that because, you want to get better, and it's frustrating to have things that don't look the way you want them to on the page. And, I go back to my pen control, my pencil control exercises all the time as a way to, learn the vehicles that I am working on, or sorry, learn the pens and pencils that I'm working with, because I know that each pen and pencil works differently on the page. So doing those exercises really does help me learn how those those tools are going to behave on a variety of different pages. So anyway, let me tell you a bit about the technique that I'm using here. So I'm using a modified contour line drawing. So a contour line drawing, the rules would state that you draw the outside, the exterior lines of the object that you're attempting to capture. And then you would fill in the details and texture um, on the inside after you draw the outside of the object. And I have approached this much the same way that I approach faces. I start from one point and work my way out. So with a portrait, I start with one eyeball, I work my way out from there, and then I put things on the page in relation to that first object. And I've noticed with the cars and trucks, I'm typically starting with one of the side or front windows or the grill, the front grill of the vehicle. So it's a contour line drawing. It's modified. I'm starting at one point and working my way out from there. It's kind of working in a spiral pattern, and that's not something I really realized I did until I took a workshop with the Sneaky Artist about building an image. I realized this is something that I think I've just been doing intuitively. Um, and I've done this with portraits. You kind of work in a spiral out from that one central point or that one object that you've captured. Um, so doing that contour line drawing, it's a very simple way of drawing. You start with that outer part of the object you're trying to capture, and then you work your way around the page and around the object as you're seeing it. You're looking at the object and you're translating it to lines. Um, and I found with cars and trucks and vehicles, I've been doing a lot of the construction equipment that is near work. With these things, the more complicated the car or truck is, the easier it is to kind of capture with some accuracy. Again, I go for not realism, but vibes. I'm not trying to have a perfect representation of things. I just kind of want to get the idea of what I'm seeing and drawing, and go from there, because I kind of want to get the feeling of it. Um, Realism is not a goal here. Any I could take a picture if I want something perfect. So, like in the case of this salt and sand truck, it's so much easier to capture the back end of this vehicle because there are lots of things for me to relate to one another. I can look at the sides of the salt and sand spreader and say, okay, so this is about here, and this is about here, and this is what it looks like in person. This is how I'm going to put this on the page. And it's I think the best way of doing this kind of image is the contour line drawing. It allows for a lot of personality in the drawing, and it's also a good way to learn. It's a simple drawing style. I'm not focusing too much on shadow. Um, so yeah, contour line drawing, great for urban sketching and capturing things and still life and all of that fun stuff. Um, so I'm at about the end of my time here. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting the channel. Head on over to my Ko-fi And buy me a cup of coffee if you enjoy this kind of content. It allows me to continue making it. Hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time. Thanks and bye.